Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. Let's wrap up the coverage of the Accessibility Awards with one last conversation about legislation. Alex Smyth interviewed nominees at the Abilities Centre in Whitby, Ontario back in April. Alex, you had a chance to speak with human rights lawyer and advocate Lorin MacDonald. What does she see as the biggest issue for Canadians with disabilities?
It's your favorite thing, Dave. You always love talking about it. Semantics and definitions.
Oh, I do.
Especially in the disability space. And what she says specifically, it's how we define disability because, some of the definitions that we have based a lot of legislation on is a bit antiquated, it's a bit outdated. How we kind of view disability in a modern context has since really evolved and there's a lot more nuance to it. So she'd like to see that change happen. Lorin expands on that thought.
The issue is how we define disability. It is not only what you can see as being those who use mobility devices, maybe they use a guide dog, have a white cane, because that accounts for a very small percentage of the disability community. It needs to also be aware, people need to be aware of the disabilities that we cannot see, those that are non-apparent, episodic disability, chronic disabilities, mental health issues, and recognize that disability is far bigger than what you can see. And as a result, it impacts a larger group of people. So we need to constantly be making people aware that disability is very broad and that we all benefit from having accessibility in the community, in the workplace, in activities that we do for fun, like here at the Ability Centre. And we need to push for that because really it comes down to universal design. If you create physical spaces and systems with universal design in mind so that everyone can use them. And all we need to do is think about curb cuts and automatic door openers and stand back and see who is actually using those features, because initially created for those with mobility disabilities, it benefits everyone. And no one has to specifically ask for it. No one has to feel forced to disclose that they have a need or a disability, and everyone wins.
Alex, whenever somebody mentions universal design, people on the outside might think, oh, but that's some pie-in-the-sky stuff. There are no standards. People don't know how to do universal design. And that's one of the mistakes that I think exists in this conversation. There are universal design ideas. There are good policies in place that people can pick up right now.
Yeah, and great organizations who do a lot of work in it, and individuals who are advocating, looking at workplace accessibility consulting. We have quite a few of them chat on the show.
Oh, yeah.
Who do great work in that space, and it's trying to just convince the general public, and that's always the struggle. And this is something that will come up later in the conversation, is to talk of, well, why do we always need to have the personal experience to understand someone else's point of view or the needs that other people may have? It's just, you have a community that's coming forward and saying, hey, this doesn't just benefit us, it benefits everyone. And the classic example of, well, make this accessible for a wheelchair user, but also a parent with a stroller or someone with a bicycle. It's like you always have to relate in these types of terms, which is, it can be tiresome, it can be frustrating, but it's important to keep doing that work because you keep pushing forward the kind of the steps towards a greater accessibility and inclusion for everyone.
I mean, Alex, even thinking about from our perspective, right? Thinking about taking a bus. It was like, for me, it was revelatory when I started getting audible bus announcements on the bus. And I thought to myself, this makes it really easy to live in the city of Ottawa because I don't know where anything is. And now I'm getting audible bus announcements. And I'm sure that might have been something that was as revelatory for you when some of those announcements were also being displayed visually, like around the bus in big bright fonts.
Oh, absolutely, because, and it's not just, and again, to broaden out, is for anyone who's new to a city, anyone who, as you mentioned, you being new to Ottawa, for myself as well, because not only do you get, okay, you get the audible signals, you get the visual tickers going by. Now it's still very much inconsistent, but when it is used and implemented, it is great because everyone benefits. It's not, if you're just hard of hearing or deaf, you're not the only one who gets to look at that ticker. Everyone gets to look at it. Everyone gets to hear it. So again, this is the thing. It's like, yes, it may be a kind of initiative to support folks with disabilities, but again, as Lorin said, it just, everyone wins. Everyone benefits from this.
I'm glad you're bringing this back to Lorin, because that was me on my own little detour there. How did Lorin suggest people get accessibility pushed forward?
Yeah, so again, these are some of the tried and true things of continue to engage with businesses and business leaders, those in the private sector, but also the public sector. Keep the pressure on the government because, yes, there are legislative tools and legislation in place to kind of push forward things like accessibility. But as the conversations we've had for the past month or so around the Canada Disability Benefit, it shows that the government can't always be trusted to come to the right conclusions on their own. And Lorin expands on the need to continue to push forward to make sure accessibility is improved across Canada.
And that's the thing, because it's so dependent on political will. And political parties, they come and go. And so it is frustrating to us where we've been hearing about the business case for hiring people with disabilities, what, for a decade or more, and the dial is not moving. So why is that? And I think that it's until you get that the corporate leaders who fully understand what disability means. Sometimes it takes them having a temporary disability, breaking a leg on a skiing vacation or whatever, to fully understand this is hard. And yes, our lives are hard. It doesn't need to be. And so we really have to keep, building on the promise of the Accessible Canada Act, the AODA, and then, of course, most recently, the Canada Disability Benefit, which is very on the top of everyone's minds right now because the budget just came out last week. And it's disheartening to see how little has been provided in the budget to lift Canadians with disabilities out of poverty, because that's a very real concern. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And the only way that things change, that things happen, is when the community mobilizes, work together, advocate, and keep the pressure on. You have to keep your foot on the gas, and to demonstrate that there is value in including people with disabilities in all aspects of life, and that we want to participate. We don't want to be brushed aside and have so low expectations. We deserve more, and we deserve to have the agency to move the dial for all Canadians.
Alex, a lot of that conversation is about quality of life and the economic side of that, and that deeply connects to the housing side of the equation. You spoke with accessible housing advocate Kate Chung. Why did she create? What was her rationale behind the Accessible Housing Network?
Well, it's very much the point that Lorin just made there about the need for the community to come together, mobilize, and collaborate to push accessibility forward, because Katie will mention, like, there were a lot of organizations and a lot of people in the space working, but there was a need to pool resources, bring in that collaboration, because you have a much stronger voice when you all work together towards the same goal. Katie explained more.
We're split into silos. There's an organization for every disability you can think of, and for seniors, and that's just got to end. We have to work together. So we have all these organizations gradually joining us. We've reached the point where they're contacting us and asking to join. So I figure we're onto something. It's really important to have a place to live. You know, the AODA doesn't even mention housing. And the Ontario Building Code only requires that 15% of apartments in a new building be visitable, not accessible enough to live there. So there's nowhere to go. And as somebody who's 82, I am not going to the long-term care jail.
So with that baseline in place, what would Kate like to see done?
Yeah, a bit of everything. You know, as she mentioned some of the legislative gaps that already exist, and she wants to see a complete overhaul, a much more attention paid to accessible housing, access to, you know, universal design for new builds, things like that. It's really important, as she mentioned, it's like, you know, we've talked about this issue, the fact that, yeah, the building codes only have to make it visitable, not livable. Well, that shouldn't be, you know, something that is acceptable for anyone, let alone, you know, a way to get government funding for building new builds. And this is something that she really gets into, and she talks about the different kind of legislative kind of frameworks that she wants to see overhauled with the changes to make accessible housing more available.
We want every building code changed. So starting with the National Building Code, we want it to require that all new housing be universal design, so anybody of any age or ability can live there. And not one penny of government money should go to any housing that's not universal design, because people with disabilities pay taxes, but they can't live in any of the housing that's built with CMHC money. So, and we want the Ontario Building Code changed the same. We want every municipality to tell the developers, you want to build here, the housing you build has to be universal design. The thing is, CMHC has reported that to build a new apartment costs the same, whether it's accessible or not. So there's no excuse. People say, who's going to pay for it? Well, you're paying for it now. It's exactly the same. And to build a house that's fully accessible costs less than 1% more than standard housing. So cost is not a valid excuse. It costs a huge amount to renovate standard housing, and I think that's where this myth started. But build it new, and it can be universal design, and it doesn't cost any more.
What has the response been since the formation of the Accessible Housing Network?
Frustrating, frankly. But the one bright light is the federal housing advocate, because she is right on board with us. She has made the same recommendations we have. So for example, the federal government's catalog program, where they're going to have these designs that they'll make available to builders, we're saying that they should all be universal design, and she has said the same thing. So at some point, we are having some effect, but really, we see the politicians' eyes glaze over, and we've really had enough of that. It's infuriating. So I see the young woman who you were just interviewing, who's so full of hope, and I am feeling really discouraged, because I don't understand why it is that somebody has to be hit by a truck before they realize the problem with having a disability. You have to have a stroke before you know you need accessible housing. Have a child with a severe disability before you realize you should have a house that doesn't have stairs you have to carry your kid up and down. I know people carrying teenagers up and down stairs, people crawling on the floor because they can't get their wheelchair in their apartment. This shouldn't be happening in Ontario, or in Canada, or anywhere for that matter. And so I'm pretty angry about it.
Alex, thank you for this. A lot of interesting interviews from your night at the Accessibility Awards. Thanks for this.
Not a problem, Dave.
Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV, or download the podcasts wherever you listen.